The American dream is quietly dying, and almost nobody notices. Imagine discovering that your entire financial future depends on just $6,000, not $6 million, not $60,000, $6,000. According to recent surveys, that's the distance between stability and bankruptcy for millions of American households today. In the richest country in history, something fundamental has changed in the United States, and most people haven't noticed yet. For most of its life, the American dream functioned less as a promise than as a background assumption. It was not something citizens debated. It was something they inhabited. Like electricity or interstate highways, it was expected to work, even when one did not understand exactly how. The dream did not guarantee wealth. It guaranteed a trajectory. A citizen could begin with little, work steadily, and reasonably expect improvement. Education would pay off. Homeownership would follow. Children would do better than their parents. Institutions, while imperfect, would broadly reward effort. The future would be larger than the present. Today, that assumption survives mostly as branding. Across the United States, tens of millions of households live within one modest financial shock of insolvency. Surveys suggest that $6,000 in unexpected debt, the cost of a used car repair, a minor medical procedure, or temporary job interruption, is enough to push a typical family toward bankruptcy. The margin between stability and collapse is no longer measured in years. It is measured in months. The dream has not disappeared. It has become conditional, and conditions, once introduced into a national myth, tend to multiply. Prosperity on paper, the United States is still the richest large economy in the world. Its corporations dominate global markets. Its universities attract the planet's talent. Its stock indices continue to set records with reassuring regularity. Venture capital flows more abundantly than in any rival system. Productivity growth, though uneven, still exceeds that of most advanced economies. Measured by aggregate indicators, America looks formidable, measured by household resilience. It looks fragile. This divergence, between prosperity as recorded and prosperity as experienced, has quietly become the defining economic fact of modern America. The country's balance sheets improved after the fiscal crisis of 2008. Its citizens' expectations did not. Asset owners recovered first. Wage earners waited longer. Renters waited longest. Many are still waiting. In the meantime, the price of entry into middle-class stability has risen sharply. Housing requires larger down payments. Education demands larger loans. Healthcare absorbs larger shares of income. Childcare rivals university tuition in some regions. Transportation costs fluctuate with energy markets that households cannot influence. And policymakers cannot reliably stabilize. The American dream once assumed that effort preceded reward. Increasingly, reward precedes participation. The geography of opportunity, economic inequality in America is often described as a difference between rich and poor. It is more accurately a difference between places. The collapse of manufacturing employment in the late 20th century did not merely cut jobs. It rearranged expectations. Industrial towns that once offered stable wages and civic cohesion were asked to reinvent themselves as service economies. Some succeeded. Many did not. Regions that absorbed the transition now function as engines of growth. Regions that did not do so function as reminders of what transition costs. Opportunity migrated toward metropolitan clusters: Boston, Seattle, Austin, San Francisco, New York. These cities accumulated talent, capital, and infrastructure in reinforcing cycles. Elsewhere, economic activity slowed and then stopped accelerating altogether. Americans did not become less mobile. Mobility has become less rewarding. Moving to opportunity now requires confronting housing shortages, education barriers, and credential inflation. The frontier spirit survived. The frontier itself did not. The credit interlude, for a time, borrowing concealed the transformation. The early 2000s produced a convincing illusion of universal prosperity. Houses expanded. Consumption accelerated. Credit substituted for wage growth with remarkable efficiency. Financial innovation spread risk broadly enough that few people noticed where it had settled. Then came the crisis. Markets recovered faster than households. Asset values rebounded. Equity portfolios regained their footing. Property owners eventually regained theirs as well. But wages remained subdued. Homeownership became harder rather than easier to access. Younger generations discovered that the latter had not disappeared, it had simply been raised. Debt did not vanish after the crash. It changed form. Mortgages gave way to student loans. Student loans gave way to credit card balances. Credit cards gave way to buy now pay later installments that transformed consumption into a subscription service. Prosperity remained visible. Participation became optional. Inflation, the great equalizer, for decades, inflation functioned as a historical memory rather than a present danger. Policymakers treated it as a technical variable. Households treated it as an abstraction. Then prices began to rise. Between 2020 and 2025, grocery costs climbed by 30%. Rent consumed larger portions of take-home pay. Energy prices fluctuated unpredictably. Childcare in some states has approached the annual income of entry-level professionals. Medical costs remained capable of dismantling savings accumulated over years. Inflation does something unemployment cannot. It reminds everyone at once, unlike recessions, which affect sectors unevenly, inflation spreads quietly through every transaction. It weakens confidence not only in buying power but in predictability itself. Citizens begin to doubt whether planning stays worthwhile. When planning becomes uncertain, optimism becomes optional. The shrinking buffer, American households have always carried debt. What changed was not the existence of leverage but the disappearance of margin. Savings rates fell. Fixed expenses rose. Variable costs became unpredictable. Credit absorbed the difference. Society can tolerate inequality for extended periods. It cannot tolerate uncertainty indefinitely. The psychological difference between being poor and being precarious is large. The poor expect instability. The precarious expect stability and discover its absence. That discovery changes behavior. Restaurants empty. Vacations disappear. Medical appointments are postponed. Repairs wait. Education is delayed. Entrepreneurship declines. Risk becomes something avoided rather than pursued. An economy organized around innovation depends heavily on citizens willing to try uncertain futures. A population preoccupied with paying next month's rent rarely volunteers for that role. The price of security, healthcare is still the most efficient mechanism for converting middle-class stability into middle-class anxiety. A single diagnosis can erase a decade of savings. Insurance reduces exposure but rarely cuts it. Administrative complexity ensures that uncertainty persists even when coverage exists. Education performs a similar function. University degrees still correlate with higher earnings, but the cost of obtaining them increasingly precedes the earnings themselves. Students begin adult life not with assets but with obligations. Credential inflation ensures that many feel compelled to take part regardless. Housing completes the triad. Homeownership once functioned as the anchor of American mobility. It now functions as its gatekeeper. Property values in high-opportunity regions rose faster than wages for long enough to transform ownership from expectation into achievement. The dream did not disappear. It became mortgage-dependent. Tariffs and the politics of protection. Trade policy once promised efficiency. It now promises security. The reintroduction of tariffs and industrial policy reflects geopolitical realities rather than economic nostalgia. Supply chains proved fragile during the pandemic. Strategic rivalry with China intensified. Reshoring became a bipartisan aim. Protection has costs. Domestic manufacturing stabilizes employment in some sectors while raising prices across others. Strategic autonomy improves resilience while reducing purchasing power. National security gains compete quietly with household stability. Policymakers accept this trade-off. Voters notice it. the result is an unusual political alignment. Citizens support industrial policy even as they absorb its inflationary consequences. Bankruptcy as routine. Financial distress once arrived dramatically. Today it arrives gradually. Bankruptcy filings rose again in 2025, reaching 544,000 cases. The increase was not catastrophic. It was normal. Normality matters. A society accustomed to occasional crises behaves differently from one accustomed to continuous pressure. The first expects recovery. The second adapts to constraint. Households adjust expectations downward before policymakers adjust policy upward. By the time legislation arrives, behavior has already changed. The dream rarely collapses overnight. It erodes in installments. Behavioral adaptation. Citizens no longer wait for rescue. Instead, they adjust. Spending declines. Debt restructures. Healthcare postpones. Education defers. Family formation slows. Geographic mobility decreases. Entrepreneurship hesitates. None of these decisions appear dramatic individually. Collectively, they reshape an economy. Consumption weakens. Productivity slows. Innovation narrows. Trust erodes. Economic distress rarely is still economic for long. It migrates into relationships, institutions, and expectations. Eventually it migrates into politics. The rise of survival voting. Political behavior changes when economic expectations change. Citizens who believe improvement support stability. Citizens who doubt improvement support disruption. The United States has entered an era of survival voting. Electoral choices increasingly reflect immediate financial anxieties rather than long-term ideological commitments. Candidates promising restoration compete with candidates promising redistribution. Both attract support from voters who believe the system has already failed them. Institutional legitimacy weakens quietly before it collapses dramatically. Confidence in the government declined. Confidence in corporations declined. Confidence in the media declined. Confidence in universities has declined. Confidence in neighbors declined. Trust, like savings, takes time to accumulate and extraordinarily little time to lose. Asset ownership as destiny. The American dream once depended on income mobility. It now depends increasingly on asset ownership. Households with property, equities, or inherited capital continue to experience upward trajectories. Those without assets depend primarily on wages. Wage growth, though positive, rarely matches asset appreciation. The result is a subtle transformation. Inequality no longer reflects differences in effort alone. It reflects differences in entry position. Children inherit opportunity indirectly through housing markets and directly through financial transfers. Geography decides access to networks. Networks decide access to capital. Capital decides access to security. Mobility persists. It simply requires better starting conditions. Innovation under constraint. The United States stays the world's most innovative economy. It also relies more heavily than any competitor on cultural optimism. Entrepreneurship requires tolerance for failure. Failure becomes expensive when healthcare is uncertain, housing is scarce, and savings are thin. Risk-taking declines accordingly. Innovation does not stop. It concentrates. Instead of emerging broadly across regions and income groups, its clusters inside technology corridors supported by venture capital ecosystems. Outside those clusters, caution replaces experimentation. An innovation system can survive concentration. It cannot expand through it. The institutional question. Economic distress becomes politically dangerous when citizens conclude that institutions cannot respond. The American state is still powerful. Its fiscal ability exceeds that of most peers. Its currency anchors the global financial system. Its military stays unmatched. Its regulatory structure still shapes international markets, yet domestic confidence depends less on capability than on responsiveness. Citizens rarely ask whether the government can act. They ask whether it will. When the answer appears uncertain, expectations shift downward. Cynicism replaces engagement. Participation declines. the dream depended not only on markets but on belief. Belief is harder to quantify than GDP and easier to lose. A promissory note revisited. The American dream was never solely economic. It was a narrative. It promised improvement across generations. It promised dignity through effort. It promised fairness without equality. It promised opportunity without guarantees. Most importantly, it promised plausibility. Citizens did not expect success. They expected the chance of success to still be believable. Today that plausibility is unevenly distributed. Some regions experience abundance. Others experience stagnation. Some industries accelerate. Others disappear. Some households accumulate assets. Others accumulate obligations. The dream survives, but it no longer functions as a national baseline. It functions as a selective outcome, the geopolitical dimension. Domestic expectations shape foreign policy more than strategy papers admit. A confident middle class supports international engagement. A precarious middle class questions it. Trade agreements, alliances, and security commitments appear less attractive when citizens doubt their own economic future. Recent oscillations in American foreign policy reflect this tension. International leadership needs domestic consensus. Consensus requires confidence. Confidence requires mobility. Without mobility, leadership becomes intermittent. Allies notice, rivals do too. Structural reform and political time. Reviving mass upward mobility would require changes on a scale rarely compatible with electoral cycles. Housing supply would need expansion. Healthcare costs would need containment. Education finance would need restructuring. Industrial policy would need coordination with labor markets. Tax systems would need adjustment. Infrastructure investment would need acceleration. Each reform is individually possible. Collectively they are politically expensive. Short-term incentives favor symbolic solutions. Long-term solutions require persistence across administrations. Persistence stays rare. The future of expectation. The American dream hasn't vanished, but it has changed. It used to be the default setting of American life. Now it's a competitive advantage reserved for those with assets. Location, or timing on their side, the dream still exists. It just comes with conditions, and for millions of Americans. Those conditions are getting harder to meet every year. Conditional dreams behave differently from universal ones. They produce competition rather than confidence. They reward positioning rather than participation. They encourage caution rather than ambition, yet they do not disappear entirely. The United States keeps advantages unmatched by any rival: demographic dynamism, technological leadership, financial depth, immigration capacity, and institutional flexibility. These advantages continue to generate opportunity even as they distribute it unevenly. The dream survives. It simply requires qualification. Once, Americans assumed improvement. Now they calculate it. Once, mobility felt inevitable. Now it feels negotiable. Once, the future arrived automatically. Now it requires financing, and when a national myth begins to resemble a payment plan, citizens do not abandon it immediately, they just stop trusting the interest rate.